Hello, welcome to another episode of Executive Suite. I'm your host, Thomas Braun, and today we're here with Dave Marx from Frontrunner Consulting. He's the founder and the principal of the firm. Dave, you do an M&A advisory consulting business as well as another stream. Can you please explain to us, give us an overview of Frontrunner Consulting?
Sure. So there's two levels of service I do. One as a merger and acquisition intermediary, matching buyers and sellers of companies, and the other one is as an executive recruiter. And where this came from way early in my career, I was a Series 7 investment banker, and then later was an executive recruiter for a pretty large franchise. So in 2008, decided to go out on my own. And the premise merging the two practices, which is kind of unusual, would be working with like a CEO who's between jobs, going down the traditional job search path. My proposition is, Thomas, why don't you look at some of the companies that were for sale in your past employment as a leader and see if it makes sense to pursue that personally. So fast forward to today where I've got a large proprietary database of over 20,000 M&A contacts. I can provide a lot of deal flow to buyers or executives to companies that maybe need somebody to lead a business, or maybe outside board member, or maybe at the front end on an advisory to look at a deal and determine whether they should pursue that or not. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Actually, it's a very interesting angle that you have there with the executive recruitment. What about the situation where somebody is retiring and they're selling their business and there's a buyer, but they need somebody to run the business?
Yep, that's the key component, and proud to say just yesterday we got an executed letter of intent on that exact situation. A gentleman who's about 58 years old, looking to retire in the freight brokerage business, found a buyer nicely aligned to make that happen, and we hope to close in 45 days. So that's the great example where you've got an actionable opportunity where you've got a good reason to sell on a buyer that did the nice alignment from that standpoint, and was able to get that done in basically 30 days. So that's a good example of being able to help a seller accomplish their need of finding a buyer, helping the buyer find a business that they were looking to seek. Well, I kind of feel like a matchmaker sometimes, finding the companies for sale with the buyer, or finding that executive for the company looking to hire somebody.
Yeah. Well, 58's a little bit young to retire, I guess.
That's right.
But
But he's at
um,
that point. He doesn't want to answer the phone anymore. So I agree. But the premise is this is the reason why he was looking to sell, was looking to move on.
Yeah. But the reason I say that is just because demographically, the generation ahead of him, the baby boomers, you've got this huge bulge, demographic bulge of people retiring, sometimes called the silver tsunami. And this is leading to a lot of companies going up for sale. And, but they want to retire. So, and a lot of them might be smaller companies. Maybe they have 1 million in EBITDA or whatever. Um, so in that deal range, I'm thinking if there's going to be a silver tsunami, there's going to have to be a tsunami of executive recruitment to fill all those roles.
Well, it's kind of twofold. You hit the nail on the head with like a million of EBITDA is the sweet spot that I look for, where I specifically seek out buyers looking for companies that small, because they normally get underserved. They're too small to afford a traditional investment banker who wants tens of thousands of dollars up front on retainer and charges a pretty high closing fee, which makes it difficult for a company that size to afford. So I fill that gap in that space. Now, the premise is, if there's no succession plan, the owner doesn't want to stay on, may give pause to the buyer taking on that opportunity. So I come in with the second level of service on the recruiting side and say, Thomas, if you're looking to buy the business, but that owner is not willing to stay on, I can bring in somebody who's industry aligned with the relevant P&L experience that can run the business at close. So that alleviates a lot of that situation that you're talking about, people looking to retire, but who's going to run the business post close? I can address both those needs, find the buyer and have an executive that can come on board.
What about roll-ups? Like you might have a fund that is interested in, like, now I think HVAC companies are a hot deal. They
Yes.
want to go and buy up, perhaps 10 of them, and they each have that 1 million of EBITDA. Are you seeing that happening?
Absolutely. And there's an example there where in these roll-ups, you might be able to integrate the customer base into the platform company, the first business in that portfolio, where having that CEO executive stay on isn't as critical because you've already got leadership on board that can take that over. A lot of it just depends on what the owner wants to do and then what the buyer is looking to do. If the buyer says, "Hey, Thomas, I can buy your business and roll it up into our existing platform," then that addresses that need, and the owner doesn't have to stay on. But you got some, transition period, maybe 30, 60, 90 days to make it happen. But it really depends on does that buyer have an existing business like the HVAC industry, and if so, it's just buying up the company, expanding your territory, using the existing management to lead it so it's not as critical to have that owner stay on post close.
Yeah, and there's a lot
Generally
of
speaking.
I think they can probably get a lot of value out of it just by standardizing things. Everybody's wearing the same uniform, same corporate image, same uh, customer experience as well, and um, and then people will feel more comfortable dealing with a bigger company. If I have problems, there's somebody I can call at their head office and complain. You're not just dealing with one person. So, uh, and I guess with a lot of mom and pop built businesses, you might walk in and see there's somebody smoking behind the counter or whatever, right? So you can sort of corporatize it a little bit and you bring it up a notch. So their exit is strategy is to roll these up and then sell it to a bigger fund. Is that a realistic strategy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it could, if you have like a private equity buyer that buys up these HVACs, they've got a time frame, a charter that says they have to sell the business in 3, 5, 7 years. If you're a strategic or a holding company that buys the HVAC, you could hold it in perpetuity. There's no gun to their head that says I have to sell this in a certain time frame. So a lot just depends on the structure of the buyer in terms of their mandate, whether or not they have to sell the business. But going back to your previous point, another benefit of these roll-ups is maybe integrating back office support, maybe technology that the company bought doesn't have, that the new buyer can bring in to improve efficiencies, lower the total cost of operations, make it more profitable just from the existing companies in their portfolio. So that's always an attractive part when you're doing these add-ons is, what can I do with this existing business that's maybe not as sophisticated as our current companies from either a technology standpoint, business development, marketing, whatever it may be. Those are, good incentives to buy that business.
Hmm. So, what are the what kind of trends are you seeing now in the M&A industry? Um, Maybe you're seeing something you know, uh, a little bit different because
Well,
when I say different, I mean different from like AI. Like there's hundreds and hundreds of AI startups, and people. You read like somebody started up an AI company 6 months ago, and they just sold it for $8 million. Is that something that is a real trend, or is it just a bubble? And what do you think about that?
I think that the biggest issue is companies have money to invest in called dry powder and trying to find that right company for sale. You have so many buyers with money to spend, and a lot of these companies go on, they raise that capital, and there's a cost to do so, but they have to invest that money in a certain amount of time. It's called limited partners that provide this capital. And those limited partners say, Thomas, listen, I want you to go out and buy that business, and I want you to sell it 3 to 5 years from now so I can get that certain return. But if you're out trying to find that business to buy and you're already a year, 2 years into it, and you've not bought that business, it forces the buyer sometimes to make some irrational acquisitions at a price that maybe they would not have chased. So the deal is trying to find those companies for sale. And going back to your earlier comment about people at retirement age. Yes, there are quite a number of companies that are looking to sell, but there's more buyers than there are sellers. It's kind of like in the home market. There's so many more homeowners looking to buy homes, but you got 4 million shortages of homes, at least in the United States. So it's a seller's market. And to some degree, that's what we're seeing too in the M&A world is that there's so much money out there, but not enough companies for sale that even if every company that for sale got bought today, you still have so much capital out there that needs to be deployed. But going back to your AI issue, is that is an interesting aspect in this industry. How do you use AI, maybe from business development, going out, trying to find companies for sale through AI, or using AI, just like this business that I found a buyer for. They use technology in the logistics space to make themselves more efficient. So trying to integrate AI, which they're doing today in their existing companies, but not in the company that I represented for sale, can take advantage of it. That can be a huge improvement in terms of making their business more efficient. So that they're not using AI to replace people, they're just making it more efficient in terms of routing and scheduling, in terms of the logistics industry, as an example.
Nice. So, and I got one more question for you on going back to the exit issue.
Mhm.
So with you got a roll up, and so you've got that first level of fund that does a roll up of like a dozen HVAC companies, and they turn around and they sell it to a medium sized fund so they can get their exit 5 years later. What does the medium fund do with it?
Same thing. It's kind of like repeat and rinse. They may do the same thing. They may hold on to it for 3, 5, 7 years, and they may hold on to it for decades. Again, I think it's important to look at what is that buyer structure. Is it a private equity group? Is it a family office? Anything outside of like private equity that has that mandate that says we have to sell it in a certain amount of time. All other buyers, whether it's a strategic or a holding company or family office, they don't have that same charter, so that they could hold on to it. Like great examples, Berkshire Hathaway, holding on to company for decades, if not 100 years or more. And then, if somebody comes up and wants to acquire that business, and if it's at a good price, that company says, yeah, let's entertain the discussion. But there's a real difference between as a private equity or any other type of buyer to determine what's the hold time for that investment. But you're right, the objective is, can I get 2, 3, 4 times return on that investment? And when I reach that point, you sell it, and the next buyer, may have that same objective, or maybe not. They just, like the business and want to hold on to it, and it's not a concern about the growth as much as the previous investor does.
Mm. Well, I guess one thing they could always do too is that if they meet the listing requirements, they can go public,
Oh, well,
and
that's
that's
another great example too,
mhm.
right? In my world, in terms of what I do, having been in a licensed investment banker in my work today by design, I don't do anything that's publicly traded. So that's not even on my radar. But you're exactly right. That is the objective for a lot of these buyers is get it to a certain scale and then take it public and then, get the upside from the IPO and then beyond as well. So absolutely, it's another exit strategy.
Yeah, or take the whole fund public, like Berkshire
Sure.
Hathaway. So instead of then they can just keep all those private companies
Exactly.
um, rolled up under their umbrella. So we're coming towards the end of our podcast now because you've got hard stop coming up. So we got to wrap this up. Did you have any closing thoughts you wanted to share with us before we say goodbye?
Well, sure. I think in terms of what I do, being a little bit unique, I take it even that step further and saying, if you're a business owner and you're looking to sell your business, is that I typically get paid by the buyer. And the reason is the buyers that I work with, they have their own due diligence teams that go in, invest in looking into these companies to determine fit or no fit, who are more than happy to pay a buy side finder's fee. So the premise is to the owner, say, Thomas, you're an owner of a business, is there's no cost, there's no risk to
Hmm.
engage me to help sell your company. No retainer fees, no upfront costs, no closing costs. So I provide hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more, savings to that buyer in helping a buyer, acquire that business. And probably 98% of the buyers I work with have no problem paying a buy side finder's fee. So that's the unique component that I do, where typically, sell side entity, investment banker, sell side brokers are going to charge some kind of an upfront retainer, whether or not they sell the business. So you're already on the hook for that. and
Yeah, no one
probably
wants
charge
that.
you, all right, and success fees and other components too. They can make it pretty costly. So I try to make it pretty affordable to the sellers, and in most of the cases, I'm reaching out to the same buyers that these bankers do anyway. So it's
Mhm.
a win-win for everybody. But more importantly to the seller, significant savings at closing.
Okay. Well, it sounds great. Thank you for coming on, and thank you everyone who's been watching this podcast. If you like this sort of content, please like and subscribe. And until next time, we'll see you later. Bye for now.